Yeah, not too bad. I guess for everyone's benefit here, I'm Robert.
I'm Alice.
And we got into a bit of an argument, didn't we?
Yeah. We did. That's a common occurrence.
Yeah. And we thought that actually it might be a good idea to formalize it and film it, because why not? And Conor here decided to be the judge.
Indeed. I'm happy to judge today. A good idea to formalise the argument so that, nobody's hurt, everybody can sleep at night.
And we can find out definitively who's right.
Exactly, that's the most important thing.
And if you get hurt, it's in an official capacity.
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly. You will need some rules.
Yes, we will. So, Conor, what are the rules? Tell us the rules.
I think it's got to be high school style, right?
I can do that, yeah.
So, cast your minds back. Yeah. You'll have 2 minutes apiece. Make sure your rebuttals are inside of your own time. You won't get any extra time to make your rebuttals. Mm-hmm. And remember, you're trying to convince me, so make it persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I guess the debate that we're actually doing is which is the best decade in cinema history.
Yes, we should say what the debate is.
It makes sense. You've been raging at this topic for so long that it's...
We've been at each other's throats for a while.
So which decade in cinema is the best of all time as of right now? 2022.
Yes.
Check my watch.
Well, I think the 1970s.
Yes, and I think it's actually the 10s. So,
not 2010s.
Not the 1910s.
Yes.
The 2010s.
Yeah. If it was the 1910s, you'd definitely be wrong.
Yes.
So, who should go first?
Yes. Rock, paper, scissors it?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Okay. Ready?
So, rock, paper, scissors.
Yes. I actually want to go second.
That makes sense.
You want to go second?
Yeah.
That makes sense. We have 2 minutes for your opening argument.
Okay.
And your time starts now.
Okay, I think what's important to remember, first of all, is when you're talking about the best decade in cinema history, you also have to talk about what is the most important, what is the most influential. And there's really nothing more important and more influential than the 70s. Cinema was in the absolute shitter. Prior to that, the 60s was struggling. It was getting very, homogenized and very samey. So at this point, it was the first time that the studios were like, okay, we need some new blood, we need some fresh ideas, we need to push the boundaries. And the cinema of the 70s really, really did that. It was the first and last time that the cinema actually opened their doors to these new ideas and allowed the boundaries to be pushed. And I think it speaks volumes by the fact that even films in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010's, they are still all doing exactly what the movies from the 70s were doing, and in most cases, in pretty much all the cases, they're not bettering it. They're not bettering it at all, So, I mean, when you look at the roster of films you've got, Patton, Clockwork Orange, Sleuth, The French Connection, The Godfathers, The Sting, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Rocky, Chinatown, The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Alien, Star Wars. The list of Jaws, the list of films that are just endlessly iconic and changed pretty much everything about the way we see movies, the way we understand stories, the way we understand directing and acting. When you look at movies today, like The Batman or even bloody Kong Skull Island, they're always like, oh, we're basing it off of the 70s, we're basing it off of the 70s, we're basing it off of Apocalypse Now, off of, 3 Days of the Condor with Captain America Winter Soldier. Pretty much anything that is worthwhile today, they're all rooted in being inspired by that decade and the great films from that decade.
Very nicely done, sir. An excellent opening argument. We'll now be turning our floor over to Alice. Wow me about the 2010s. I'm ready to be taken away.
I will.
You have 2 minutes to make your opening argument, and your time...
Do you have notes?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay.
I came prepared in the 5 minutes before we shot this. Yeah.
Okay, Alice, you have 2 minutes to make your argument, and your time starts now.
Well, I'm going to start with rebutting. So you said that obviously they're very important and influential. I'd say that's incredibly subjective, because what's important and influential to you and, dads in their 60s is not important and influential to the current, generation of filmmakers and to the current generation of film lovers. I will also say Kong Skull Island, really, that's what you're going to consider the great thing that's been influenced by the 70s? Look, I understand The Batman is in the movie that just came out. That's when we're starting to get influenced by the 70s. Maybe not the best couple of movies to use as examples, but let me just say that I'm going to start by just talking about the fact that, look, all the movies you rattled off, great. You know what they have in common? They're all dirty, they're all dark, they're all gritty. You know what's better about the 2010s? You've just got variety. Not everyone's going to be into that sort of stuff. So, for example, the 10s are all about allowing more expression, allowing more just storytelling and more variety in that. So let me just rattle off a few different genres. You know, you've got animation, like amazing things like Inside Out, literally getting into what emotions are. You've got high concept sci-fi, you've got that with Inception, you've got that with Arrival, you know, really getting into the crux of what does it mean to be human. You've got sci-fi and fantasy like Scott Pilgrim, which is just balls to the wall insane, but also just so much fun. You've got drama with Spotlight and Social Network, you've got horror with Get Out, you've got indie films like 8th Grade, you've got international films like Parasite, you've got action films like Mission Impossible, you've got psychological films like Whiplash. It goes everywhere, and these are all completely different sides of the story. These are all completely different sides of the coin, and you know what? They're also not all stories told by old men, you know, or at the time, young men, white men, who are the only one. I'm going to go there, because it's one of the arguments I'm going to go in, because who are the filmmakers making these films? They all look the same, they all had the same experience. For once, we're getting experiences that were told from completely different points of view, completely different upbringings, and honestly, completely different points of argument, which makes it more evolving as a film audience and ensures that as we can evolve and as we can push the boundaries even further. I'm not saying that, you know, the 70s weren't great.
No, you're done. You're done. You're done.
I'm just going to stop at the word further.
Very nicely done. You can see the rebuttal functioning at the top there. Paid out for Kong Skull Island.
Apparently.
I hate to see it, but you know, I'm a massive Kong Skull Island fan, so middling.
No, we watched it together, and like we were just.
It was decent.
As soon as Tom Holland walks in, speaking of Brie Larson, they're just like, why
Tom
are they
Holland?
Tom Hiddleston. Yeah,
really one of the Toms.
Same difference.
Same. Yeah, he just walks in and he's just like, why are they talking to each other? Oh, it's because of the female and male lead.
Yeah, I was when we were watching that film the whole way through, I was like, why?
I mean, that was the whole film, yeah. Why?
Can I just have Samuel L. yelling at the...
Yeah, didn't we like go through that film and like we pointed out like, okay, there's like 16 characters. All you need is Sam Jackson, Shea Wiggum, and...
John C. Reilly.
John C. Reilly, yes.
Yeah.
He's a great character.
He was a great character.
Alice, thank you very much for your points. Much appreciated. Convincing stuff, Rob. You've got your work cut out for you.
I know I do.
2 minutes starts now.
So, you know, the thing is that you're saying that, like, it's not important to the filmmakers and the film viewers of today, I think is actually a gross misinterpretation of what filmmakers and film lovers are actually liking today and watching today. Because the fact remains that so many films made today, and even throughout the 2010s, they are all inspired by, in part stylistically, from these classics from the 70s. And I think, you know, I made that point already. And when I brought up with the Kong Skull Island thing, it wasn't necessarily about the fact that Kong Skull Island is good. It's not that good, but the fact remains is that that's what they were looking at. They were looking at the 70s being like, oh, we want to look at Apocalypse Now. We want to recreate Apocalypse Now. And then that furthers my other point of saying how we're not bettering what was done in the 70s. No, Kong Skull Island is not on the same level as Apocalypse Now. Captain America Winter Soldier is not on the same level as 3 Days of the Condor. But that's the whole point, is that a lot of these filmmakers, even they are today and they're evolving the stories and that, you know, we're hearing more voices, their entire film education came from what we got in the 70s, because they're all looking at that being, oh my God, you know, there is something so energetic and palpable and really visceral and real about the films that came out in that period. And on the note of saying that they're all grim and gritty, that's not the case either. I mean, yes, sure, we did get into a grim and gritty period with things like The Godfather and Chinatown very famously, but, you know, Rocky is an unbelievably uplifting film. Star Wars basically made the blockbuster moment paired with Jaws. We wouldn't have blockbusters of today without Star Wars and Jaws or Alien. And on top of that, it's just like, you can't really deny the impact that these films have had, even into the 2010s, where we've got all of these franchises, all of these ideas that are coming out today, and they all find their roots in the 70s. And yes, the fact remains,
Beep, beep, beep.
There we go. Damn it.
Perfect end,
Damn it. Nah, didn't get
the fact remains.
What is the fact that remains?
I can't. The rules are I can't say it. I have to follow the rules. The fact is going to remain hanging.
Yeah, the fact will remain.
The fact will remain. Yes, indeed. Excellently done, Rob. Alex, are you ready for your part two?
I am so ready.
So ready. This is excellent. Okay.
Here we go.
Well, I don't want to interrupt that preparedness, so your time will start now.
So I just want to start with your point on, you know, that they've impacted and inspired filmmakers today. I think that would happen regardless of whether it was an iconic decade in cinema or not, because it's the past, and inadvertently the past obviously impacts the future. So it could have been the worst, you know, film era in history, and people still would have been inspired by it. You know, every film is somebody's favorite film. Doesn't mean it's a good film. And I will say, you know, you brought up these amazing films of genre, you know, Apocalypse Now, Godfather, Star Wars, but you know who else doesn't think that they were quite right when they originally came out? The filmmakers. How many cuts has Apocalypse Now had? How many re-edits has Godfather had? How many re-edits has Star Wars had since it came out? I mean, have they been for the better? Who's to say? Point is, even the filmmakers think they can improve on the original art. But as we're talking about genre film, I'm going to go to a genre that was really came to life in the 2010s. You know what genre that was? It was the dawn of the superhero age. And love it or hate it, the Avengers in 2012 changed everything. It brought about the idea of the cinematic universe. And now that's something that's been run, you know, the DC, it's been run in things that aren't even normally a cinematic universe. But what's created is this interconnectivity of stories and of characters and of abilities that has allowed these stories of the multiverse, of space, of having the biggest actors in the entire world have to kowtow to the fans in a way, right? The Avengers Endgame or Avengers Infinity War, they are films that normally never would have been able to be made because, they're too expensive, people aren't interested, there's too much going on, and yet they did, and yet they were the biggest films in the world. And love it or hate it, it has brought about a completely new genre of film. You cannot just put superhero films in fantasy or sci-fi anymore. It's its own thing. And that is not something that has happened in a very, very long time. And you know what else? It also brought about the rise of a completely new era of A-listers. You know, all of the people who are huge now from Marvel and even DC, when they started, people kind of knew them.
People kind of knew him.
People kind of knew him.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's good. That's all right.
It's a finished sentence.
All right, Rob, your time starts and now.
So to your point about how past movies are always going to influence the future, yes, that is true, but then why is it for the last 50 years, the 70s is always the one that just keeps influencing no matter how many new filmmakers we get? The impact of the 70s is undeniable by that fact because it just won't go away. These films are ingrained so strongly into our culture and into our cinematic language because they broke all the rules and created all of the new rules, which we are still following. And to your point then of saying that even the filmmakers at the time don't like the movies, you know, might be a controversial statement, but to be honest, once the film is out there, it doesn't actually matter whether or not Coppola doesn't like Apocalypse Now, or it doesn't matter if George Lucas had to re-edit Star Wars 16 times. Those movies are out there, they were beloved, and they've continued to be beloved. Their opinion kind of doesn't matter once it's part of the culture. And then when you're saying about how 2010s, yes, the Avengers and the superhero cycle is the defining moment of what we're in now, and far be it from me to now shit talk a superhero, the superhero world, but again, that finds its roots Superman 1978, which basically wrote the rule book on so many superhero films that are still following the rules. And you could argue that, sure, we've got this whole cinematic universe, but we're also ending up in this dark ages now where we've got so many superhero films that don't know how to actually do it appropriately. The only one who seems to be able to do it is Marvel. It hasn't actually created a slew of great originality and great franchises. Marvel's doing it amazingly, but the effects are that everybody is doing a horrible job of it, and all we're getting is shit like Morbius every single fucking day. Okay, so I don't see how the breadth and the achievement of the Marvel Cinematic Universe actually is making things better for cinema. In fact, it is actually kind of making things worse in the broad sense. It's great for that franchise, and I love that franchise, but it's not actually doing anything good for cinema, creatively speaking, which the 70s did do. And even the good Marvel Cinematic Universe films, like I mentioned earlier, Captain America Winter Soldier, find that I can't finish an argument.
We'll never know. The
fact remains that we'll never know what I've got to say.
Look, I mean,
I got very heated there.
You did.
Yeah.
No, you got into some good points. I will say, I think you were taken by the passion, and it was all rebuttal.
Well, I mean, I think the reason being is because she knows what she's doing. She's making me argue against one of my favorite franchises.
Yeah.
She knows what she's doing.
I think the Superman pivot was very good. I'm so sorry you couldn't end on a sentence.
2 for 2.
2 for 2. Alice, are you ready?
I am.
Your time begins now.
I take umbrage that you say that the 70s are the only decade that is still influencing. Look at the 80s, look at the 90s, how much have they pervaded current cinema right now? And Rob, what's one of your favourite movies? Is that LA Confidential? Oh, what's that inspired by? Is that the 40s perhaps? You know, and isn't that your favourite movie of all time? So clearly what you've just said doesn't make sense. It's bullshit. And then, like, nostalgia exists regardless. And it's every single decade that has come before the 2010s has influenced the 2010s, except for maybe the 2000s, except for, you know, the fact that CGI maybe shouldn't always be the thing that people use, which is very much what the 2000s did. Now, what I was also saying, that you say that the roots are in the Superman for the superhero movies, I disagree. Yes, it was the first. That doesn't mean that's where the roots are. The roots are in the comics. The roots are in action. The roots, they come from the original stories. And you also say that Marvel's the only one that does it successfully, but Morbius is the film you brought up as an unsuccessful, you know, traversal into it, and it's a Marvel movie. So that also doesn't make sense. So finally, what I'm also going to say is, way back when, in your first argument, you talked about how the boundaries were pushed. Well, the boundaries in the 70s, the boundaries were pushed in the same direction. But you know what the 2000s and 10s managed to do? They managed to take all that came before and refine them. So let's look at the technology. Like I mentioned, the 2010s really is when they decided, and what they realized is that the mix of VFX and practical is what creates the best. For example, look at Mad Max Fury Road. And what they also decided was action. You know, it's all about the longer takes, making adrenaline pumping, the focus on fight choreography. Look at John Wick. And then finally, it's about the weird. It's about exploring the stories, the themes, the characters that completely haven't been seen before, that aren't the same character over and over and over again with the same exact, you know, intentions. And I mean, look at, for example, Ex Machina, look at Hereditary, look at The Favourite. It's all about embracing the weird and then also pushing them forward, because look at Marvel, what have they done? They've taken Chloe Zhao, they've taken Taika Waititi.
They've taken Taika Waititi.
They've taken them.
They abducted Taika Waititi from his house.
See, this is where I'm like kind of sad that we're not doing another round of arguments, because I'm like, no, I can come back at all of that.
Too bad, so sad. You lost rock, paper, scissors.
That's all right.
So, all right, now Conor has to decide.
Yes.
Oh. I suppose firstly, before we declare a victor, I'll need to break down how I feel.
I guess you might.
So you have
It's a
some
therapy
context.
session.
Well, not about my life. Let's focus on just the decade stuff.
Yeah.
So to Rob, I feel the body of your argument, as processed by the chairperson, the judge, the man in charge, is your understanding is that film has been so affected by things that happened in the 70s that it would be silly to think of any other decade as being the best decade in cinema, when it's so evidenced that this is something that affects current cinema. This is something that was the main crux of your argument. I feel, Alice, I feel like the main crux of your argument was that limits are being pushed and directions are being formed and new opportunities are being created. Mm-hmm. I think some of the better points that were made in terms of rebuttal, I did think it was quite smart to talk about Superman and to bring that back, because I thought, again, it was very clever for you to talk about superhero films, because I know this man loves superhero
He's wearing
films.
his one non-superhero t-shirt.
Exactly. So
Instead, I'm wearing my Ryan Jordan merch.
So putting that guard up, I thought was very clever, but I thought you were clever to get around it by talking about Superman. I feel like the other clever point, though, was when you said that all these 70s directors that you're quoting have been revisionist. And I think that that is true, and that's not even something I thought about. So there were multiple points throughout the argument where I was actually flipped. So I was flipping and flopping throughout the entire time. Yeah, like a magic harp, flail.
I don't know what that means.
All I've got is splash. Yeah, but I think if I look at who had the most convincing argument for me personally, and I'll break it down after my verdict, I have to give the victory to Alice.
Yes!
Now, let me break it down. Partly it was Kong Scholar. That's not true.
Imagine.
It's not true.
Of all the films.
No, that's not true. Actually, I did get your point with Kong Skull Island.
Yeah.
I think the reason that I was impacted by what Alice was saying is because the things that excite me personally about cinema, especially lately, have been the broader and newer open categories of film that I feel have come to flourish, or at least I was convinced have come to flourish. throughout the 2010s. Moreover, I am a superhero film fan. I do think your point about it choking out the market is like relevant. I do think it's worthwhile, but your whole argument was about influence. And then you were like, yes, they are very influential. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it was difficult because like you weren't able to maintain you weren't like, look at this film evidence, look at this film evidence. Instead, over and over, you were like, no, it's clear that. No, it's clear that. Well, how clear is it? Tell me. Like,
the fact remains.
The fact remains. The fact remains. I do think, though, that you had very good points, and this was very difficult for me. Mm-hmm. Specifically, it was the Superman one that I'll give you the most credit for. I thought that was a good little... That nearly saved you.
Yeah, oh, right.
Yeah, that nearly saved you. I think Alice was a little bit more proactive in addressing your points. Mm-hmm. But that's what you get for getting to go second. So there's a part of it that I think she had a bit of an advantage on. Yeah. But she used that advantage to great effect. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I was convinced that the 2010s are more influential to films that I want to now watch. Right. Now, that said, I certainly was convinced that the 70s were important to a degree.
They're important, they're just not the best.
Certainly not. Yeah, again,
You're allowed to be wrong, it's fine.
Yes, and I'm allowed to be wrong too. Yeah. I'm not today, and I've never been before.
No, today was to determine
who is right. Exactly, so I'm not wrong.
You said that.
Yes, I did say that.
I'm not wrong. So congratulations to the both of you. I will say that it was a hard-fought round from both of you. Neither one of you phoned it in, and both of you were actively rebutting each other, so very well done. Now, I am needed elsewhere, so I'm going to have to run off, guys.
Yes.
No worries,
I think that actually setup should be ready soon.
Yeah, so we should probably...
So thanks for taking a break with Clean Slate, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, should actually. Congratulations on your win, and to the 2010s, the best decade in...
Congratulations to the 2010s.
Yes.